Are you a brown person who's ever walked into a yoga studio and felt just really disoriented and felt disconnected and, just felt like, what the heck is going on? Yeah, me too. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Brown People Problems, a podcast where we chat about experiences that are unique to brown folks all around the world. You don't have to be on the South Asian subcontinent because our experiences are so universal. And so if you are a South Asian listening anywhere in the world, hope this speaks to you. Today I'm talking about something that has been on my mind for many, many months, and that is yoga and the practice of yoga and the North American practice of yoga and the decolonization of yoga. So before we dive into it, for those joining us today who maybe aren't particularly familiar with the language around decolonization of yoga, let's quickly chat about that. What do we mean when we say to decolonize yoga or to decolonize anything for that matter? As so many of us are aware, the South Asian subcontinent was colonized by many different groups, British being one of the major ones that had colonized the South Asian subcontinent for hundreds and hundreds of years. And usually with the colonization of any place, what comes as an end result is usually an erasure of cultural heritage. So an erasure or watering down of cultural heritage. So societies that have been colonized for a really long time can become dissociated from their own identities and their own practices. So we have a lot of practices that are ancestrally ours and that, were really helpful to folks, whether it was yoga, whether it was Ayurveda, but when places that colonize, these practices get tossed out the window because they're labeled as backwards or heathen or whatnot. So that's colonization and decolonization in a nutshell. And what we're trying to do now is have more of a conversation around how can we take the practice of yoga, which now in North America feels just like a workout. Like it's a 30-minute workout that you do 3 times a week. And that's the colonized perspective of it. And how can we decolonize that? So how can we educate ourselves about what yoga truly is, what it really is, and what it really comes from, and what it really stands for? I'm talking about yoga because it's been on my mind for some time. I have really been trying to enhance and get reconnected with my practice of yoga, but not just seeing it as a workout, but seeing it more as a lifestyle. So let's chat a bit about the history of yoga. I certainly am drawing a lot from my research, so please don't take what I'm saying to be the ultimate truth. I am a learner, just like so many of you listening, and my research may be imperfect or incomplete, and I always value feedback. But my research is showing that yoga, the origins of yoga can be traced back to like 5,000 years ago, to ancient Egypt and ancient India. I haven't seen much around ancient Egypt, but certainly like ancient India is a really big part of what my research is showing, and as well as like my anecdotal learned experience. And it seems like the practice of yoga, the philosophy of yoga has gone through evolutions over the centuries, naturally as anything would. Initially, it really seems to have developed so we're talking about year 1500 before Common Era. Around that time, it really seems to have developed more around just like rituals and practices to help you get connected with the higher self, like the divine spiritual self. And then it's sort of evolved a little bit more into emphasizing meditation, self-inquiry. You have breath control incorporated, which has really set the foundation for some of the philosophies. So we have, the original period, the Vedic period, in like in 1500 to year 500 before Common Era, and then you also have a couple hundred years after when Common Era starts to like year 500. But essentially, yoga is essentially a combination of 8 sutras, or I can refer to them as principles if that helps. And it's an 8-limb system. Yoga sutras are basically a set of scriptures that have been outlined initially they were outlined in medieval age, written by a sage named Patanjali. Basically, these 8 different limbs of practicing yoga that teach us how to embody yoga fully in our mind, in our body, and in our spirit. Yoga, the word yoga translates to unity, right? So it's really about, yoga is about creating unity in our mind, body, and spirit, and these 8 limbs are different scriptures designed to teach us how to do that. I don't think you need to have particular religious affiliation to resonate with any of this. And if you do, that's okay. And if you don't, that's also okay, because the more I have researched about yoga, the more it seems it is a philosophy for how to help you live your best life, and not so much around rigid rules that often come with religion. The purpose of yoga is to help you reach enlightenment, right? Which is your best self. So let's talk about the 8 limbs of yoga, the 8 scriptures here. So we have yams, which are principles that teach us how to treat ourselves and the world around us and others in the world. Then we have niyams. These are standards by which we should practice self-discipline. Then we have asanas, which I think the ones that most of us are familiar with. These are the yoga poses. Then next up, number 4, we have pranayams. These are breath control exercises. At number 5, we have pratyahar. This is a sense of sense withdrawal. Limb number 6 is dharan, which means concentration. Limb number 7 is dhyan, which means meditation. And limb number 8 is samadhi, which means enlightenment. And I'll go through these. But these are overall the 8 limbs of the yoga scriptures that we're talking about today. The way that they're designed is more to allow for scaffolding. So you start with, the first, and by the time you need to kind of address these in the same order to help you make the most out of it and to help you create a foundation. So first we have yams. Yams are the principles that teach us how to treat others and the world around us. Okay, so we have some different principles here that will sound familiar to so many of you. We have ahimsa, which is non-harming. I used to think of it as non-violence, but it seems like it's about non-harming others and thinking in a kind way. We have satya, which is truthfulness. This isn't just about speaking the truth, but more about living lives authentically. Then we have asteya, which means non-stealing. This doesn't just mean that you don't take material things from others. This is also about respecting other people's time, their energy, their resources. So when I was reading about this, what came to mind for me was boundaries, right? Boundaries can be a form of asteya or non-stealing. Next principle we have that's in yams is brahmacharya, which means abstinence. So I think I was getting a very kind of research here. Some research talks around it simply being around sexual desire and celibacy, but some research talks about abstaining from anything that takes us away from our authentic selves, right? So it could be material things. It's hard to do in a capitalistic world, but that's part of it. And then we have non-hoarding, or aparigraha. This is the opposite of greed. So again, when we say non-hoarding, it doesn't mean in a material, tangible capacity, but more about us holding on to people or things in general, or ideas, ideologies that perpetuate harm. So you're holding on to something that doesn't serve you. It could be material or it could be immaterial as well. So those are the yams. The non-harming, being truthful and living authentically. Non-stealing, so not just material things, but time, resources, energy. Abstinence, abstaining from anything that takes you away from your authentic self. Same with non-hoarding as well. And all of these are designed to help you live in a more spiritually aligned way. The next limb that we have here is niyams. Niyams are ones that I was quite familiar with, but I didn't know they were part of yoga. So niyams are basically standards by which you should practice self-discipline if you want to embody the practice of yoga. So first niyam is such, that's cleanliness. This is about, things like bathing regularly and hygiene and whatnot, but it's also about having clean thoughts about yourself and about others. Clean, pure thoughts about yourself and others. Then we have santosh, which translates to contentment. This is particularly tough in a capitalistic society, but my research shows that contentment is about the ability to feel content with the way that everything is in the here and now. Because we live in a hustle culture, we're constantly moving towards the next and the next and the next goal and the next accomplishment. Contentment is around, you can still have goals, but how do you live in a way that helps you feel satisfied with what you have and feel content and gratitude for what you have. That's santosh. Then we have tapas, which translates to heat. The philosophy talks about how it's important to experience discomfort and, heat in order to grow. So, when you hold a yoga pose, like, it is uncomfortable, but that's where the heat is being generated and that's where growth happens. So in order for there to be self-discipline, there has to be tapas, there has to be discomfort, and there has to be that heat. The next niyam is svadhyay, which is self-knowledge. Now, by the way, if I'm mispronouncing any of this, please have patience. I'm a learner just like you, and this stuff does not roll off of the top of my tongue, but I'm doing my best. But self-knowledge, again, discipline, it's for self-discipline. You have to be able to dive inwards, right? It's interesting. The whole practice of yoga is not about what it's on the outside, but how it feels on the inside. And I think about, the workout classes that I go to for yoga, all I'm thinking about is, how does my pose look? Is my form okay? Am I holding everything the way that I'm supposed to be holding it? And it wasn't until a yoga practitioner said to me, who went to India and actually studied, like, in ashrams and stuff, the true meaning of yoga, she said to me, it doesn't really matter, what your form looks like. Like, it's okay. It's totally fine. Bring your attention inwards into your body. And that was the first time a yoga instructor said that to me. I have heard that you should stay focused on your breath, but going inwards, notice how that feels in your body when you hold that pose. That was really helpful. And that seems to, be in line with this niyam in helping you build more self-knowledge. And the last principle of self-knowledge of niyam is Ishwar Pranadhan, which basically means fully surrendering to the divine, okay? So this is about not surrendering to another person, but surrendering to the higher self. This helps folks, who have like religious or spiritual alignments, and they feel like there's a higher power or there's a God that, is looking out for them, and that they can defer that responsibility to. As I was researching about this particular one, I thought of AA programs, Alcoholics Anonymous. All of these 12-step programs are actually about deferring to the higher power. So it's interesting to see so much of what we use in the modern age comes from or is inspired from yoga. All right, so that was yams and niyams. Now the third limb that we have in yoga, or the third scripture, is asanas. This is the one I was most familiar with. Asana is basically the practice of yoga postures. It seems like this is the one that the Western world is most preoccupied with. This is the, like the workout yoga. But it, again, seems like even with the asanas, the poses are important, yes. But my research shows that the purpose here is to help you flow from one asana to another with ease of mind and of body. And that comes with the self-awareness and the self-discipline that we've already spoken about. The next limb is pranayam, which is breath control. There's different pranayam exercises that I personally have done, but it seems like there is a ton. But again, this feels like very much like a mindfulness practice. Pranayam, breath control, is designed to help people be mindful of their breath, right? And not just be thinking, or being externally focused, but it's helpful, but it's designed to help you bring your focus inwards into your mind and into your body. The next limb is pratyahar. This means sense withdrawal. Now, this took me a little bit of research to like really understand what they were saying here, but it seems like this talks about any time our five senses, our ability to touch, smell, feel, taste, hear, are preoccupied with what's happening externally, we lose connection with what's going on internally. And as we can see, right, the whole premise of the philosophy of yoga is to help you get more connected to yourself. The next limb is dharana. Dharana means concentration. That single pointed focus, right, that folks experience. So the idea of this is, if you can focus your mind, if you can train your mind to be focused on the yoga postures that you're doing, or the philosophy of yoga as you're practicing it, whether it's through pranayam or asanas, then you are training your mind to have better focus and concentration in general, which very much, again, seems in line with what we already know, but we didn't know it was part of the yoga philosophy. The next limb we have here is dhyan, which is meditation. Very similar to dharana, right? Meditation is more of a state, so like a flow state. So it seems like with meditation, the original yoga philosophy is not just about, you visualize things and you meditate, or you just do deep breathing and you meditate, but it's more of a flow state, okay? So, when you're in a state where you go hiking and you have no idea like what time it is, like you're just like in the zone, you're in the flow, that's what dhyan seems to be. It's like you are in a flow state. There's a sense of peace, there's a sense of clarity, there's a sense of stillness within you. That's dhyan. And the last yoga limb is samadhi. This translates to enlightenment. This seems like, like the top of the ladder at the very end, you get to that place. And that's exactly what the philosophy and these scriptures of yoga seem to be designed for, to help us go from a place of doing things to now just being with ourselves and being present in the moment. And when we're able to do that, we reach enlightenment, which means that you're not so preoccupied with the past or the future, but you're more present. So those were the 8 scriptures of yoga. Now, obviously, this is not an exhaustive kind of, not exhaustive definitions of what I've shared. If any of this sparks your interest, do your own research. But it just made me think about how there's so much that comes from yoga, the philosophy of yoga, that, we didn't register as being part of yoga, but it really is. So yoga is not just like a 30-minute workout that we do, but it's more a mindset and a lifestyle change that we create for ourselves, because it's not a 30-minute workout, but more of a philosophy by which you live your life. And I love that. And I can see how, as I reflect on these 8 limbs, I can see how that creates unity, how that can create unity in the mind and the body, right? So instead of being externally focused, we're internally aligned. And that is what it means to have yoga, right? So you're aligned. Okay, so we spoke a little bit about the history of yoga and the colonization and the decolonization now of yoga. But yeah, it really seems like it wasn't until the late 1800s, it was apparently Swami Vivekananda who brought yoga to the West. And then it started to generate interest, and then we had a lot more interest in the mid-1900s with a couple other gurus, and especially with the Beatles, where yoga really started to pick up pace. There's a couple documentaries on Netflix that I had previously watched on this, but it is a thousands of year old philosophy, right? It's probably going to get watered down over the years like it did. But when we talk about decolonizing yoga, we're talking about, okay, how can we try to restore our practice of yoga, or how can we try to restore yoga to its original form, as close to that as we can get? Because it happens with traditions, right? Over the years, a lot of traditions evolve, but a lot of traditions, ancestral knowledge or wisdom also gets stripped down to its skeletal form. And in my learning, that really is what seems to have happened with yoga, that it's just a workout now, when we're not treating it as a philosophy that it was actually designed to be, and to help us live our best lives. When really it's about helping you achieve inner harmony, self-awareness, spiritual enlightenment. And again, like, it doesn't have to be religiously aligned, but that's spiritual enlightenment. I'd love to hear from folks listening. If you can tell me one thing that was new to you in your knowledge about yoga from listening to this episode, what was one thing that you learned about yoga that you didn't know before? You can let me know in the comments or in the Q&A section if you're listening on Spotify. You're also always welcome to email me at brownpeopleproblemspodcast@gmail.com with your thoughts, comments, suggestions, ideas, and I always check those emails. This email will be in the show notes below as well. That's it, folks. This was part 1 of decolonizing yoga. Today we spoke about the history of yoga a little bit, talked about the basic structure of the scriptures. Let's get back together next week and chat more about decolonizing yoga. What does that actually look like? And what does cultural appropriation look like versus cultural appreciation? Because there is certainly a difference here. All right, thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for joining me today. I will see you in the next episode. Enjoy your practice of yoga, whatever that may look like this week. The guest and the host at Brown People Problems do not offer individualized therapeutic or medical advice, and our conversations should not be interpreted as such. This podcast is not a replacement for therapy. This podcast exists for educational purposes only. Please consider your circumstances and engage with the content mindfully.